Today, first, let me just go through our disclosures again. I got to run these by you every single time. We're going to be recording, just so you're aware, for the Zoom people and for the website later. So if you miss a class, we'll have those recordings back out. They want me to let you know that they're doing the forum today is California's focus on wildfire preparedness. And again, there's no room number on here. Do you know where that is, Shaniqua? Okay, we'll find out where that is. I don't know. They used to put the room number just right on there, and they don't do it anymore. Anyway, today we're going to start talking about, like yesterday, we talked on a lot of hypotheticals and what ifs and reasons for and a lot of things like that. But now we're going to actually begin to talk about what it looks like to diagnose parts of your cash flow, to diagnose your insurance coverage, to diagnose some of your estate planning, but your tax situation and real estate, and just really get into there and do that overview so that you can kind of have an awareness of what you're going to be looking at and how we're going to be picking apart pieces of it. So like we mentioned previously, we like to break things down. 3 is basically our favorite number. I like to break things down into 3 pieces because it's really easy to segment things that way, and it makes it not feel like this one big giant process that's looming at you every time, but rather individual portions we can do it at a time. So first, we'll begin with our basic financial planning before we ever move on to deep investment analysis or the active management that comes afterwards. So we're going to talk about a lot of financial planning concepts. We're going to talk about a lot of things in generalities and specifics. And I would very, very much encourage, especially during this portion, to really, if you have questions, throw your hand up and let's have a conversation, because this is where things are going to be so particular to whatever you've got going on. And there will be things that I missed that may be pertinent to you. There may be things that you didn't realize that I'll mention, but once we start getting into this content, it's really important for us to have conversations. So if you have a question, just throw your hand up and we'll get right to you. I don't mind slowing down and spending a lot of time talking to you about these things. So what do we call phase 1? Well, we call it the diagnostics because we like to think of it as like a health checkup for your finances. We just want to get you in there, get your physical done and go, are you currently dying? And if you are currently dying, hopefully we can patch you up so that you're not, now we can go back and actually begin to optimize, right? Because like if there's these big giant holes that are just taking away from your chance of success, any investment optimization or extra little bit of planning here and there or the right beneficiary designation is not going to fix any of that. So we want to make sure we take a look, figure out, are we on fire? And if we're on fire, put out the fire so we can move forward. So first thing we want to look at is our cash flow. We want to look at what our money in and money out looks like. And I know that this is an incredibly boring topic. You've probably done it many times. You know what your budget is, but it's important to just talk about it anyways. Because if you don't have a proper expectation, how do you expect to make a proper plan? If you don't know what this expenditure is going to be or how much you want to have put together, whatever the number is, there's some number that you would like to either be able to spend for the rest of your life starting today, that you would like to leave to a beneficiary at some point. And it's important that we quantify those things and be able to have realistic expectations. So if we have a concrete number, if we have something we can actually state what the value of it is, we can way more easily figure out how much you need or what the overall picture looks like to actually support the goals that you have. So the process is really, really, really crucial for people in their midlife. So if you know of any people that are sort of at this stage and they haven't thought about it at all, it's really important because if they're not putting away enough money and over time to actually create a basket of assets to work with, there's not going to be much that we can do. But it's still important for those living on investment distributions as well, because it's important to understand sort of the math of how long things can last and what we're able to realistically provide for, and what's the chance of possibly a market correction putting us into a situation where we can't do it anymore. We want to know sort of what that math goes to. So you should probably already have a good grasp of your budget. I really hope you do, but knowing the specifics just makes the rest of planning so much easier. You're going to just list out your income sources, every single one of them. If you've got any wages, or now if you've got pension, if you've got any extra self-employment or contract, any 1099 stuff coming in, Social Security payments, pension plans, annuity payments, investment distributions, wherever it's coming from, and things like investment dividends as well. So all of these are different income sources that we can use for our cash flow. And then, of course, we want to have our expenses, our housing, our health care, groceries, utilities, and all the stuff that makes up our life. But don't forget to include things like leisure activities. We don't want to create something that's so restrictive that now you can't move outside of it, because then if you don't feel like adhering to this plan for a little while and you want to go off the deep end and spend a whole bunch of money because you've been cooped up for too long, that's not going to be helpful either. So really get a realistic idea of what it is. And these could be expenses that are today. Just quantify them and know exactly what they look like so that we can support them with math going forward. So we have up at the front, in case you need it, an income and expenses budget sheet that we threw together, just so that you could have something that might remind you of the different things to use. So if you want to utilize that, that's great. And so we've put that together, but there's a lot of great tools. I like to use something like Rocket Money, which is just an app on my phone and tracks my transactions, to be able to categorize and just kind of get an idea of what's going on. But based upon where you are now, what your health is looking like, you know, how much of your pension you've got, how many of your investments, all that kind of stuff, we want to figure out, like, what are we looking at in these future periods? If we're planning for 5 years, if we're planning for 10 years, if we're planning for 20 years, if we're planning for very short periods of time, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff just helps us figure out how we're actually going to invest. Because a lot of people will be invested in the stock market, and they know that that is inherently, like, probably a good thing to do. But if you don't know why you're investing over there, why you're looking for the type of return and volatility that you are, what number it's supporting, or how any of it fits together, it just feels like this kind of scary thing off to the side, and you have no idea how it's connected to everything else. So understanding how that's going to support all of these different expenses for the future is going to help you actually choose where to invest and whether you need to take a risk or not really take much at all, and make a very concerted, informed effort to do it right. So there's something that we use. We're not going to run through calculations today, but I just want to kind of get it into your head how this math works. You can look up time value of money calculators, financial calculators, and it'll help you sort of put this together. But essentially, the idea of time value of money is this. You're going to have a few different pieces, how much money there is right now, how much money there's going to be in the future, what is the investment return or interest rate that's going to be earned over the time period, how long is it going to be, and how much is going to be paid in or out of this account balance. And so this can really just help us figure out whatever our needs are. So, for example, we've got a couple different examples here. Let's say you're wanting to generate $50,000 of income every single year for 20 years straight. And at the end of the years, we're assuming that we're at $0. We've gotten all the way down to zero, and we have an annualized average return of 7%. That just means every year we're earning 7%. And this is not, you know, an expectation to go into. This is just an example of what that might look like. The result ends up being that the investor needs $530,000. And that is because every year, $50,000 will get taken out, but then 7% will be earned on whatever money's left over. So that kind of extends out the life of the portfolio. And so at the end of the time, then the portfolio gets down to 0%. Now, understand that because these are average numbers, not every single year is going to have the same return. So there's going to be part of something that we'll talk about as well. Did I see a question? Yes.
Is 7% return?
7% is a realistic return for some asset allocations, but it completely depends on what we're talking about. It depends on what we have put together in a portfolio. Realistic return, average of 7%, is very much achievable with a full equity portfolio. But at the same time, your short-term risk, your risk on a year-to-year or month-to-month basis, is much higher. So that's another thing that we'll talk about later, where you have to be able to decouple average returns from returns that you feel in any given year or any given period, because the average is just going to be, the longer you have, the closer your actual returns are going to be to that average. So yes, it's achievable, but we have to be able to understand what level of risk do I have to achieve that. So you might be at a point where a portfolio goes up and down by 12 or 14% throughout the year. That could be part of that portfolio. It's not going to be 7 and then 7 and then 7, right? Any other questions on this topic? Okay. So we'll look at our second scenario here, which is that in 10 years, this investor wants to generate $530,000. They know what their income stream is. They figure out how much money they need to have, period. And then they want to start with a $150,000 portfolio. So they've got something put aside. They want to create an investment portfolio that's going to get them to this figure. And now we're saying that they're not adding any money. Now, what ends up being the result is that they require a 13.5% annual return, which is really high because they're not putting in any extra money. They're just starting with 150,000 and they only have 10 years. So now we start getting to the point where it's important to understand what these numbers are so that you see what's required of you to get there. So you would know that if this was all you had, investing in CDs and, short-term bonds is probably not going to get you to that goal. You're going to need to take some extra risk in order to get there. So we need to be able to understand, how do we get our interest rates? How do we get our flat dollar amounts? How do we get our cash flow? So that's just kind of a couple examples of how you can use these calculators. And you literally just search like finance calculator or time value of money calculator on Google, and you'll find a lot of really good tools to work with. So something that you'll see when you have a financial plan, this gets a little bit into some weeds, but this is where we talked about how with those time value of money calculators, we're just inputting one rate for the return, like an interest rate or an investment return rate. And we can't expect that every single year is going to have the exact same return back to back. That's just not how it works. Obviously, if you've been around in the stock market for a while, you know that some years don't look so great. And some years you can't even explain how great they are. But they all end up averaging back to this 10 or 12% number that we hear so commonly referenced. So what a Monte Carlo simulation is essentially it'll go back and look at all of the different time periods that we've got, all this historical market data from investments going up and down and sideways and every which direction. And it'll start just introducing random different variables, different things to disrupt the patterns that we're seeing in the past. It just takes all of this data, squishes it all together, and tests all of the information that you put in against a range of different market environments, whether it was any of the market crashes that happened or any of the bull markets or anything in between. So usually a financial planner will use this to try and say, okay, we're going to take the plan that we've created, run it through the simulation, and see how many of these different versions of reality did our portfolio survive through and make it through. And so then their goal is to get that number as close to 100% as possible. And usually you'll see things like confidence ranges, which we'll talk about in a second. But they help us determine how much money can actually come out of a portfolio and still succeed in many different market environments. They help us generate what level of savings rates that we need. They help us experiment with different types of assumptions. You could change like what you assume inflation to be, what the level of return might be, if taxes change, a lot of different things. So again, that's shown usually as a confidence level. I'll show you a graphic of what that looks like in a minute. And it's usually expressed as a percentage. So we made it through 74% of scenarios or 85% of scenarios. And usually people want to get you to 95 or higher. That's like the really good confidence zone where you feel really good because almost every single scenario in history, your portfolio would have made it through. Yes.
Is this like a concept, like Monte Carlo, or is this like an app that you put things in, or is this something a financial planner?
Yeah, so it's a concept, it's a simulation that's piece of retirement planning software for the most part. It's used in a lot of statistical environments, so a lot of study out there, but financial planners specifically will use it as part of their retirement planning software. So you'll put in like, I want this goal, this amount of money, and it will run a simulation in the background, and then they'll use that data to help justify. Yes. Right. So if you're going to do things on your own, we're basically going to There are some Monte Carlo things that you can use out there, but honestly, I don't think it's super necessary for you to go through all of the different simulations here. I just want to bring this up and talk about how it helps us to basically have confidence in some of our picks in the industry, but I don't think it's necessary for you to use as a tool. If you can find a tool like this, it's great, but it really is just, it's part of where we get a lot of our assumptions, and to know that when we sort of intuitively talk about things, we have run a lot of these simulations in the past, and that's sort of our context for a lot of the things that we're talking about. So hopefully, yes.
Talking about Monte Carlo simulations, clearly taking the time and the street that probably mirrors a set of economic circumstances. There are those red herrings like the Great Depression and the Great Recession and those sorts of things. When you're looking at a Monte Carlo simulation as a percentage, when financial planner does something like that, does that contemplate those red herrings, or are they kind of cast out as too big of a blip or too infrequent?
Right.
To, you know.
So the purpose of the Monte Carlo is to actually include every single event that is possible, every theoretical thing that can happen. It uses all of the historical timelines. So here's basically what will happen. You might have all your different recessions, all your different bull markets, all the regular markets in between. And it's going to just pick different starting timelines, and all of the things that we talked about, what the cash flow is, what the investment account is, it's just going to run it through that timeline and see whether it succeeds or fails. So there will be thousands and thousands of simulations from different time frames. Also, when they just kind of make it do something weird just to see if things change. So actually the point of Monte Carlo was not to exclude those events, but to include them to get us to the highest level of conviction, so that we know that even through some of those, we have a decent chance that we might survive most of them. Now, a lot of the times the ending result may not survive through, you know, the Great Depression or 2009, but because those are maybe two scenarios out of all of our thousands of scenarios, we don't necessarily think that that is, you know, yeah. Oh,
I was gonna say, I went to Schwab and they did that. This was very helpful, and also because then you could just flip it, say, well, what if I had an ADU and I started renting, how would that change? And I think if I understand, they said it's 1,000, they retire you 1,000 times.
yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
Does your firm use this?
Yeah, so we're definitely using this a bit. We don't normally use it in terms of because a lot of our clients don't want full-on financial plans, but when that is a conversation that we're having, yes, that is part of it. So a lot of the times people will come in and they just don't really want the full set of financial planning, or they don't want the full income planning or all that sort of stuff. So when it's not necessary, it's not done, but we do use this through a tool called there's a tool called Money Guide and a tool called Right Capital that we both have. So those are two of our financial planning tools that include Monte Carlo. So yeah, we are using those mostly for people who specifically recommend income analyses and projections like that. But yes, tools in our belt.
The insurance companies will say, oh, we'll guarantee this, we'll guarantee that. We're not allowed to guarantee it. So all we can do is give you as many different varieties of the history, and if the portfolios come through the various good and bad times, it gives you confidence to hang in there. Plus, he's got the short-term intermediate stages. The main thing is to start from point A to point B, no matter how volatile it is, if you're diversified and legitimate.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is it a precursor or it is AI? I mean, would AI change how they do this? Because it does smush, as you said, everything together.
Yeah, so I think it will enhance the ability of this sort of software to be able to provide with accurate results. Because AI can some of these models can do some similar things. They're not quite as accurate because sometimes they hallucinate data, but I think when they're able to be trained and run on really specific inputs, I think they'll be able to introduce more different things than just the historical data that's available. I think that'll be one of the things that I see them doing is, yeah, we have all these scenarios that we've had previously, but can you just go ahead and create a different economic outcome for, the country or something like that, and add additional assumptions that we could experiment with to see how things would happen. Now, I'm going to show you this chart, which kind of shows what Monte Carlo is visibly. Now, we're not looking at a portfolio. We're not looking at a diversified account. We're just looking at Apple stock. And this is just pulled from this sort of trading blog that I found online. And basically what it's showing is it's showing that here are a couple different things that they are assuming. Here are a few scenarios of what might happen with Apple stock. So if you are invested in Apple stock at whatever price it is over on the left, like $150, you've got a certain amount of scenarios that go all the way up above 200, and you've got a couple scenarios that drift down or go sideways. So it's then putting yourself into that starting place. How are we able to succeed? At the top, probably pretty well. How are we able to succeed if the worst case scenario happens? That's something that we need to find out. So that's what this sort of analysis is helpful for. This is what you'll normally see that sort of confidence rate presented as. So this is from Money Guide Elite, which is one of the tools that we have in our office. And so you can see sometimes they will compare different scenarios against each other to show you what the confidence level is like between those. So you might have a certain probability of success spending $75,000, and it might drop a little bit when you go to 80 and drop a little bit more when you go to 85. And that's because there are certain scenarios in there where that higher withdrawal rate, the stock market goes down, and now you're taking out a bigger amount of that portfolio, and it can't recover the same way. So that's how spending can really affect your probability of success within your plan. So it's really important to be able to put those to paper. Any questions on that concept? Okay. So now when it comes to insurance, this is another thing that I think is incredibly important for us to understand, because insurance protects us from the things that we can't expect. They protect us from the things that maybe are possible, and they're just kind of out there on the fringes of our mind, but it's not something we're expecting to happen in our plan. But it's like you don't go driving expecting to get in a car crash. But if you do, you're really thankful if you have good insurance that takes care of you, and you don't have to reach into your savings and deplete that. Because then what if that happens, and then you also lose your source of income and you need to use your emergency fund, but that's been depleted because of the car wreck? It's that cascading events that really brings things down. So what we want to do is we just want to make sure that what we have is protected from these low frequency, high severity events with our insurance. So a plan like those confidence rates that we showed before, it's going to have a big reduction in probability of success or confidence rate if our assets are just majorly depleted from a lawsuit or some sort of settlement or a major unexpected expense that something could have covered. You can kind of think of it as, here's your assets. Here's your big pile of assets. You're sitting on your mound of gold, and it's wonderful. And you have good amount of insurance. Most of your things are protected, but the problem is all of that stuff that's out on the outside can just get chewed away. And if your plan involves the big circle, but you are now brought down to the little circle, it might not go so well for you in the future. Your chances of succeeding are going to drop by a lot. So we want to make sure that we're protecting that basket of assets with the proper amount of insurance, so that these things that are out of our control don't take us away from the success that we want to have. So there's a bunch of different types of insurance. As you're aware, there's a lot of different types of insurance to have out there. It's important to understand the different pieces of your insurance as well, to understand your medical, the deductible, exclusions, your copay amounts, and keep your deductible available all the time, just in case, because that's the part you have to pay out of pocket. So keep that available somewhere. Keep that in your savings. Disability, know when it actually kicks in, and specifically know whether it's own occupation or any occupation, because the difference between those two things will be, if it's own occupation, this is really important for beneficiaries or anybody younger in the workforce, especially with families, is if it's own occupation, if you can't do your job, it will pay. If it's any occupation, if you can do anything, if you can do any job, if you get a job, it won't pay, no matter if you're completely disabled for your own profession. So that's really good for beneficiaries and younger members of the family, or anybody you know that has a family that they need to protect. Long-term care, understanding what the waiting period is for that, understanding what shortfall you're going to have to manage in the meantime between when you get disabled and when it kicks in, because that's going to be important too. Just because you're insured doesn't mean none of it matters anymore. It means that it will kick in at some point, cover a certain amount, and there might even be certain qualifications to meet in order for that to work, and for how much, what the lifetime maximum benefit is. So knowing how long is this actually going to last me. Life insurance, you know, a lot of the times it's kind of along with disability where it's the most important for people who have a family to support, or if there's incomes that would be lost that you can't replace without somebody. So really important for people like that. But they also sometimes can be used for tax planning because estates receive life insurance proceeds tax-free. Sometimes they can help if there are some tax problems, or if there's debt problems at the end of somebody's life, they can kind of get covered by a life insurance payout. But we'll talk about the estate planning effects of that later. But just understand the different features of your policies, no matter what kind of policy they are. Understand how it works and how it applies. And if there's shortfalls that you didn't really think about because of you just kind of picked it or picked the thing that you could afford at the time, understand your policies pretty well. Any questions? Yes.
Assume that you're going to go into detail on these, particularly long-term care.
Yeah, we'll dive a little bit deeper into long-term care for sure. So a couple other ones, homeowners insurance, obviously. Now, when it comes to homeowners and auto, we tend to just recommend that you max out liability on these a lot of the times, because we'll talk about umbrella liability in a second, but we just want to make sure that liability is a cost that we've covered. If something happens on our property, if something happens with our property, with our vehicle, with our homes, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're able to pay that out and that we're not going to end up having to come out of pocket for expenses. So understand the types of coverage that you've got on your dwelling, for dwelling, loss of use, the medical payments, super important one as well, and the different endorsements. So if you need to actually specifically endorse different types of property that are at your home that you thought might have just been generally covered, make sure you understand that as well. Yes.
And placing assets into a trust also protective certain scenarios.
Yes, so they can. So it depends. When you have, say, an asset in an irrevocable trust. So there are two types of trusts we'll talk about more. But basically, if you have a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust, the revocable trust, while you're alive, is more kind of like an organizational thing. It kind of keeps everything in the same place, and then it passes things to where they need to go. But an irrevocable trust, you're relinquishing control. So if you do something that's your fault, and then you have this big money liability, they can't go into the irrevocable trust because you don't have any control over those assets. So that's kind of how the trust can protect assets in that way. But if something happens on the property, I imagine, you know, it's still going to be, if it's a piece of property put into a trust, you're still going to have liability for that.
Trust that everybody has doesn't give you any protection. That's just the beneficiary protection, avoid probate type thing. There's no liability protection. If it's irrevocable and it's not your money anymore, and you just get the income, then the trust is protected, but they can come after the income. So unfortunately, there's very few trusts that would give you protection from liability. Although, and we won't go into it, but there is a California private retirement trust for real estate owners you can set up and have some liability protection. So generally, I buy the insurance. And if you have an LLC, what's your opinion about that? For liability?
For liability, well, in California, it's really important to understand for a liability. Single owner LLCs in California basically don't exist at all. It's as if it's just you as a sole proprietor. But what LLC will help you do is, if you have other partners involved in a business with you, if they do something, you're not going to be liable for their share of the wrongdoing. It's just going to come from them specifically. That's what the limited liability piece of it is. You don't share the total liability if some individual member does something. Yes. Yeah.
That protects me, so the only thing that if I had any wrongdoing, they could only get what was inside the LLC, not my own personal assets.
As far as I know, and I don't know if this has changed, but in California, they don't really regard that as a protection. It doesn't, just because you're an LLC, they don't consider it as separate from you because it's a single member. So if it's just you, then you are the company. And so it would pass right through and they'd be able to come to your assets.
The one thing about a single member, some people have done, Facebook did this, is created an LLC and gave a charity like 1 or 2%. Now it's got a partner, now they're immune, supposedly a few years ago. If you have an LLC, obviously those assets are liable if it's operating like rentals or something. And maybe they don't come after your stuff personally, they just go after them. But we wouldn't want to lose properties or something. So we would recommend maximum liability insurance. And if you have an LLC outside of like in Nevada or something, that doesn't help you with liability other than charging orders. If somebody sues you, they win and you've got the LLC in Nevada, they have a hard time getting to the assets. If it's in California, the judges just kind of snicker and laugh and give them fun. But being in Nevada isn't guaranteed. It's just a harder for them to get.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we often recommend when we look at people in their insurance, like one of the first things is just like automatic, we end up looking at is go, okay, how much liability coverage do you have? Do you have an umbrella policy? And a question for that usually applies for when you start having assets that are outside of retirement assets or other protected assets. So what are unprotected assets? I've got a couple examples of things that would be protected and things that would not be protected, and why it's important that we have liability protection and possibly umbrella. So things like qualified plans, like your 401ks, corporate pension plans, profit sharing plans, deferred comp plans, those are determined by the government to be for retirement specifically. And when you have assets that are for retirement specifically, as defined by the government, that protects those assets from creditor claims, from settlements, from lawsuits, whatever. Those things are for the retirement. Now, if you're taking income out of them, that income could be subject at times, but the actual assets in these plans are protected from creditors. Same thing as traditional and Roth IRAs. However, it's not the total balance like it is in 401ks and 403bs and profit sharing plans. In traditional and Roth IRAs, it goes up to a total value of just about $1.5 million, but anything over that, it can kind of end up in state courts and they can determine how much of it do you really need, and it can just get a little bit messy and take a little bit of time. But there is some protection. Now, in California, there's a really cool thing that I like making sure my clients do. If you're going to roll over a 401k or a 403b or a profit sharing plan outside of the company plan, you're going to take it with you, go to Vanguard, Fidelity, or your advisor or whatever. What you don't want to do is end up combining it with an existing IRA account, because the traditional and Roth IRAs, right, they get their little amount of protection. But all of these qualified plans, if they get put into their own separate IRA account, the total balance ERISA protection follows them in California. So that's something that we always recommend, is that if you're going to roll over a 401k or a PSP or whatever you got into an IRA, put it into its own separate account, or an account that only holds proceeds from other qualified plans like that. Just a little tidbit to throw in there. Your primary residence in California also receives a homestead exemption up to $600,000 of equity, or it's like, forget if it's greater than or lesser than, but also the average values of homes in your area can play into it. So that would be something to look into as well, to get that homestead exemption so that your primary residence is also protected. So all those things on the left, things you don't have to worry so much about, settlements or creditors or anything like that. If we go over to the side, things that are vulnerable to settlements, to creditors, things like revocable trust assets, like we just mentioned. A revocable trust doesn't really do anything yet until we get to distribution, because they're still your assets. All that activity reports under your personal Social Security number. It's as if it's still just you. So there's no protection there. Individual and joint brokerage accounts and bank accounts, same thing. It's just your assets. That's exactly where a settler or a settlement would go to collect from you. Business assets and rental real estate, same thing. Your shares of the LLC, or if you're a sole member, I mean, that's going to be all your asset. Rental properties, anything that's in your name, that's under your control, is vulnerable. And this is not a comprehensive, this is not an exhaustive list, but it just gives you an idea of what things are that are going to fall in these categories. Yes. Oh, sure.
Yeah, but, umbrella insurance, will that
Yes.
cover all of that?
Yes, so that's exactly why we'll get umbrella insurance, is to cover these things right here. Talk about just a second, yes.
Just to say, sort of, on the individual doing brokerage, how is it protected, umbrella insurance?
Yes, so you'll have, your umbrella insurance will essentially, we'll talk about that in just a second after this slide. But here, umbrella liability, let me give you how this works. Basically, you have your homeowners and your auto liability. And so if you have a car accident or you have something happen on your home, or whatever the case may be, especially if you have a big settlement, let's say from a car accident, big multi-million-dollar settlement, and you've got, let's say, $500,000 of coverage. If you've got $2 million of a settlement that has to come out, you got $500,000 of coverage, the auto insurance goes, great, we capped out, that's our responsibility, good luck. Now you got another 1.5 to deal with. And if you've got assets of 1.5, well, lucky them, it looks like they get to pay the bill and they will take your assets and go. But if you cover those assets with umbrella liability insurance, that will step in after, or if it's not relevant, it will be the thing that steps in to protect your assets. So you want to make sure that if you've got vulnerable assets, have an umbrella liability policy that covers the total of those, so that way, if we have a settlement like this, we have a lawsuit, we go, oh, hold on a second, I have insurance for this particular thing right here. The umbrella steps in, takes the fall for you, pays that out, and then you don't have to give up your assets. So that's why we like umbrella liability a lot. In order to get it, they'll require you to max out your homeowners and auto liability first. So you'll have to do that initially, then add an umbrella liability policy on top of that as well. Yes.
Insurance, I had to kind of dance around, they didn't want to give me an umbrella on something I already had insurance on.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know why that was. They didn't, so they didn't want to qualify for my home, for my car, but it's for my other home that I did to put that on. And so for some reason, that was the trigger that led to it. So I just wanted to show that that was my experience, it wasn't this great.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of companies don't want to write it at all, and they tell you reasons why they can't, because they don't make much on the premium. You have a $5 million umbrella, and I think the premium is $1,000 a year.
Not the rate.
So they don't want to insure this stuff, so if they don't, find an individual agent and get the coverage, because it's too much, something does happen, obviously, they don't.
Are you saying an individual agent that would supplement your, like, let's say you had, I don't know, USAA and they didn't want to do it?
If they wouldn't do it, I find an individual agent to rewrite different, because they can go to different companies. And they can.
And give up your USAA that you're granted.
If they're not willing to sell you the umbrella policy, or maybe an individual says, yeah, they'll sell a separate one possibly. But their goal is, if you get in a car wreck, they want your car insurance to pay the first 500, and then that lessens their liability. But if they're not gonna write it, I go wherever I have to get it.
Yes.
I have AAA, and I get umbrella insurance from them, they write it up, but my car insurance, I have to have at least $500,000.
Right. Yep.
So after that, then they'll sell me the umbrella.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll make you max out all of your other liabilities, because here's the other fun thing is that liability from the car insurance or the homeowner's insurance, if that gets taken from first, let's say you have a $2 million policy, well, it takes from the homeowners or the car insurance first, and then like up to the additional 1.5 that totals $2 million. It's really weird. I don't understand why they do it this way. But if you're calculating how much need you have for umbrella liability, just the total value of the assets that are at risk. Make it simple. And if you want, do a little more. You could do 120%, 150%, just something that makes you comfortable, but cover all those assets that are outside, like revocable trusts and individual joint and brokerage account, individual joint brokerage banks, business assets, all that kind of stuff. Just make sure that circle is covered by your umbrella as a total.
Just with how, especially in California right now, insurance is so tricky because, they're dropping, people up in, foothills with fire coverage. I know at one point I've had USAA forever, and I went to AAA to say, hey, can you do better? And she was amazing. She said, no, we can't do better. And you know what? You're grandfathered with USAA. If you come to us, and now if you have two instances, the first one is a warning, whether it's your fault or somebody else's, you file 2 claims in a year, bye, you're gone. And then you're uninsured. So I was stunned by that, because if you have no record of ever doing anything wrong, and then 2 things happen, one of them being the atmospheric rivers that we had 2 years ago with all that rain that came down there, and you filed a claim as your fence fell over, that counts as one. And if there was a second one, they said without being grandfathered at AAA, you would be dismissed.
Wow.
But good reason to have massive deductibles, so you pay a big piece of it before you collect. I have an individual agent, but I had to use a fair plan because I had property new tax on Bradford. But then they just switched me back to a local company, dropped the premium by $1,500 a year. So a good individual agent shops around and tries to protect you so that they don't lose the business. And you might be able to find an individual agent that will cover your car, your house, and an umbrella, maybe whatever else, I'm not sure. But a good quality individual agent could go to all these different brands out there. And insurance companies should be a little more willing, because one that picked up my house came back to California. And one of the reasons is when they have all this money in reserve, a few years ago, they weren't earning any money in cash, right, T-bills. Now we get 4 or 5% supplementing premium income, and hopefully some of them.
So you mean your fence, when you have to fix the fence, and that counted as one episode, as one incident?
Because they paid out on it, yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, that's like, whoa.
Yeah.
You're a straight A client all that time, and you get one ding, and number 2, I mean, it won't happen to me with USA, but if I had gone to AAA, I don't know why she was so open with me, but I thought, wow, I'm glad she's letting me know, you should not change, because you're guaranteed to not be kicked out.
Yeah. Cool. So you might sometimes ask, why do I need this protection? Like lawsuits and claims and stuff, it happens when I do something wrong and I'm a good person, right? Well, they don't always happen just because you did something wrong or you're so bad, or things can just happen. People can get injured on your property when you're behind the wheel of a car. And these policies, these homeowners and auto policies frequently max out at $500,000. And just what happens if it's more than that? What happens if it's $1 million or $2 million? I mean, it's not uncommon to hear of suits for a couple $1,000,000 for, some pretty bad driving accidents with a death or something like that. Things can get big, damages can get large. It's important to protect. And if you're a trustee of a trust, the beneficiaries can sue you for mismanaging the trust, whether they're correct or not. They probably won't win if they're just lying. But at the same time, like if you have all of that liability, if you're managing somebody's estate and the beneficiaries are not a fan of what you're doing, that's also a risk to you that they could sue you for mismanagement. Your protection might be limited against that. So even if you have an umbrella policy and if you are a trustee, check and see what the overlap is here. See if there's anything missing or if there's anything you need to do to think about that. So a couple key takeaways before we break. 1, maximize your coverage where it's reasonable. High premiums are annoying to pay, but big losses to our assets are much, much worse to deal with. Instead of just shelling out a couple $100 extra every month or quarter or year or whatever it may be, instead having a big drain of an investment account or loss of a real estate property, that's going to hurt us so much more in the long run than having to squeeze a few pennies out of our pockets to keep our coverage high. Cover the remaining unprotected assets with your umbrella policy, get that whole pie under the protection, and then consider how life insurance could fit if it needs to. Not everybody needs life insurance. We like simple term life, not, universal and whole and all these super expensive policies where they add tons of extra things. Oftentimes the simple products are the ones that do the best work. So consider how all of those things go together. And when we come back after break, after about 5 minutes, we'll start talking about a little bit more estate planning things. So let's take 5 and come back. Oy, oy, oy.
So.
Oh, no.
Doesn't here.
All right, everybody, let's all gather and get ready to get back to it. We'll talk about it. All right, I just want to let everybody know, since we just finished our conversation about insurance, there's always going to be some extra stuff over at the table for you to take with you. But September is Life Insurance Awareness Month. So you do not need to purchase life insurance, but there's a couple good reasons why people in your life should consider it. So one of the things that we always like to do in this class is, I'll talk about things from a retiree's perspective, but it's also important for you to take some of the extra knowledge you have and pass it on to other people in your life. Because generally, people's financial literacy is not as high as we'd like it to be. And the more that I can do to share with you information that you take with you into your circles, into your family, to help us with our mission of bringing everybody up a bit, that always helps us out. So there's some good stuff on there, some good information that my team helped pull from me. Now, let's start a conversation about estate planning. Well, before I do that, any questions from anything we've covered already? Just to make sure. Yes, which,
What amount that you have is what you should be covered on?
yeah, so at a minimum, I want to look at all the stuff that doesn't already receive creditor protection. So stuff that's not 401k. So if you've got revocable trust account, individual brokerage accounts, bank accounts, and just kind of anything, all of your stuff that's in your name only, that's not retirement, that's what I want. At a minimum, that total amount for the umbrella liability. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a pretty small policy. Yeah, yeah, and so that's the other thing too, is you have your California homestead exemption that might take care of most of your equity or all of your property value. But when you start reaching above that, if you've got $1 million home, $1.5 million home, that extra equity is also vulnerable. So if you can cover the rest of that, you won't need to force a sale of the property and downsize, which can also be very scary. I know, but premiums are better than losing the home in your account. So as much as it pains to pay the premiums, it really helps out in the long term. Now, when it comes to estate planning, we'll go over some basic things. Again, I'm not an estate planning attorney, but I can help sort of push you in the right direction and give you some things to think about. So there's a couple different powers and pieces and things that we can use in our estate planning to help move things in the right direction, to help make sure that accounts go where they're supposed to go, get split in the way we want them to get split. And so when it comes to wills and trusts, those are two things that we're all pretty familiar with. Everybody's heard of a will or a trust, trust fund kids and all that fun stuff. Wills are great if you've got small estates, because you can file something called a small estate affidavit. So if there's not very much value in the estate, I forget exactly what it is, and if I have it in a slide somewhere, but it's like a couple $100,000, or it's not very much. But if you have a small estate, you can sign a small estate affidavit shortly after death, and it won't have to go through the probate process. Otherwise, if you have a bunch of property and all it's left through is a will, it'll have to go through probate courts. And we'll talk about why we don't like that so much in just a second. So wills are also great for kind of catching personal property or just little things kind of strewn about that you can't put a beneficiary designation on a really nice dining room table or something. So, a place to name things and move personal property, that's helpful. Trusts begin to help us when we either have larger amounts of assets, so we need to avoid probate. We have really specific instructions that we want to have followed. There are different types of trusts that do different sorts of things and make them happen quickly and efficiently, unlike probate, so we'll talk about that too. Beneficiary designations. I harped on this a lot last week because it's very important that you have beneficiary designations where they are available on your IRA accounts, on your 401k accounts, on your transfer on death accounts, all that sort of stuff, insurance policies, because a beneficiary designation will basically be the quickest way to say, I want this person to get this thing. And you just put them on that account, say, for example, an individual retirement account. You have your IRA, you say, I want my son to get this IRA when I pass, and then it will get re-registered into his name when you pass. No courts, no nothing. You can just do that through the financial institution with a death certificate. Yes.
Yeah, trust, you have to put that beneficiary because the trust will
Right.
tell you what.
So a trust account will not have a beneficiary designation because essentially that's built into the terms of the trust. So it'll actually just follow the trust instructions rather than the beneficiary on the account. There are also things like charitable trusts or annuity trusts or different specific things that we'll talk a little bit more about each of those. But when you have more specific needs, you say, I want this particular thing to happen, a trust can be very helpful because, you know, when you have a will or if things are going through probate, you know, ultimately the courts get to decide. They will often decide to listen to you, but they still get to decide on your behalf. And I can get things a little squirrely sometimes. Power of attorney, really important. Hope you've got one. Hope you've got, you know, both of them. There's your medical power of attorney, which is your living will, which essentially helps give somebody the power to make medical decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. I'm sure most of us have got one. If you don't, really important to have that be somebody you trust and somebody you trust really to do what's for your best wishes and your best desire and not, you know, it's a rough suggestion to make, but to make sure that they don't act for themselves, but rather act for you and your wishes, whatever they may be, however sensitive that is. Financial and legal, also very important because if you can't be there to pay your bills or you are not, you're not there to make investment decisions or pull from here or do this thing, if you lose your capacities and there are financial matters that need to be attended to, and you don't have a power of attorney for somebody to take over for you, it's going to be really hard to get those things done because we're going to have to bring somebody in the middle. There's a lot of extra, just have somebody that you trust available for that horrible circumstance. Yes.
When does it?
Well, it depends. And I believe we will talk about that in a minute, but with a power of attorney, there are a couple different pieces of the power of attorney. So a power of attorney is essentially you're signing over, I'm giving this person the agency to act on my behalf, right? So a medical power of attorney, but we'll use the financial one for now. We'll just say, I am authorizing this person to pay my bills, get into my accounts, do whatever. With a regular power of attorney, you sign that, it is valid from the moment it's created until you become incapacitated or you die. And essentially then it's just going to stop. Now, if it's durable, that means that it's stronger and it has like a nice little load of armor. So you get incapacitated and it stays in effect. Most people will have a durable power of attorney because for the most part, you're not looking to give somebody power while you're with it. You're looking for them to be able to use it. That's usually what people are using it for. But, you know, if you're traveling, if you're unavailable, a regular old power of attorney that just assigns the power, that could be useful if you have a spouse that you want to just be able to act in your name in that sort of circumstance. Now, there's one more piece that we can add, and it's called springing or spring forward. When you have a springing or spring forward power of attorney, this keeps the power of attorney dormant until some event occurs where it springs into power. It basically jumps up and it's ready to go. Most of the times that will be you becoming incapacitated, and it will require like a doctor's note or certification that you're not able to perform your duties. Then the power of attorney turns on, and then if that's when it turns on, it will also have to be durable so it survives your incapacitation. Then it turns on and the person can step in and make the decisions, but they can't do anything while you're still with it, so you still have total control. So just understand what kind of power of attorneys you have and when it kicks in. Yes.
Are there other power of attorney documents if somebody has a small estate will where they can contemplate having an incapacitation straightforward.
Yeah, so you can just have kind of on its own a power of attorney document that will step in. You just have to make sure that you keep it available and that it, different financial institutions can get to it. Because one of the things that we can see happen in our industry is somebody may have power of attorney, but they can't prove it. So it's really important to have these things available or stored with financial institutions or at different places. But yes, you can absolutely have a power of attorney detached from a trust as its own thing. But oftentimes they just get with it kind of as a package deal, so if you have a trust, it's most likely that you also have power of attorneys built in.
Nash is correct, that lasts longer after this, after that, but they call it a durable power of attorney, and that's the straightforward. Don't worry, nobody has power of attorney until you're proven incapacitated. And I've never seen a trust being done by a paralegal or attorney that doesn't have the durable power of attorney for medical claim. But the word durable, he's talking literally, that they throw it in front of it just so you know, it doesn't kick in right away, but it will last a long time.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about probate, we've talked a little bit about why we might not want probate to be involved. But essentially, we just have two different scenarios. One is where you have your assets in your estate, they go to the probate court, and then they go to the beneficiaries. What we would like to see is they go straight from your estate to the beneficiaries. Why? Well, typically, probate can take 12 to 18 months in California. This is a typical time. This isn't like a big long, it can take longer than that, 2 years, 3 years even, but typically it's 12 to 18 months for assets to go into probate, be worked out, and then get sent to the beneficiaries. And here's the part that I hate the most. It's really expensive for some reason because probate fees are usually, they can be similar to financial advisor asset under management fees, a percentage of assets, but they charge on the percentage of the gross assets, which means if there's any debt, they don't care. They charge on the value of all of the assets before debt is deducted. And that's a percentage that goes through this process. And it can get very, very expensive. And, there might be $5 million in gross assets and $1 million in net assets because of heavy leverage in some sort of maybe real estate thing, but they don't really care. They charge the fee on the entire gross amount of assets. And the other thing we really don't like is that probate proceedings are public proceedings. Everything that happens in probate is visible for everybody to see. It's all in there. You can look it up and you can see exactly what went where, what went to who. And so if there is a situation where maybe there's a little bit of family drama or you just don't really want your business to be completely public, probate's not exactly what we want because it takes a long time, it's expensive, everybody gets to see what's happening. And the assets could even be distributed in a way you didn't intend. Because there are court proceedings and because beneficiaries can come and argue for different splits of your assets, what happens if somebody has a really good argument and they take more than they were supposed to get, or they stop somebody from getting what you wanted to give them? I just would not want to let the courts decide for me when I'm not here to speak for myself, and all they have is this one will to hopefully make sure that everything goes in the right place. Yes.
I had an experience with probate proceedings regarding the death of my brother.
Yeah.
We went to probate because of his investments. And this happened years ago, but to the best of my memory, something having to do with investments required to go to probate. Maybe because the beneficiary was designated, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Although there was designations for family in my brother's will. My experience was that I did have to bring an attorney. I was not charged an arm and a leg, but the worst part of the experience was the time spent in waiting out the completion of the decision of the court. The court moved along in my favor. There was no great arguments brought to the probate regarding any kind of tensions in the family. But there was money there that was designated in certain ways that was unavailable to get to because of the duration of time we spent.
Absolutely.
Going through the process, and for me, it took not as long as expressed up there, but some 4 months before it was found completed.
Yeah, and even that, when it could be simply having the right beneficiary designations or having a trust that moves things properly where, you could get things done in a matter of weeks or days rather than months and maybe a half a year or a year. And that time can be really important because, the death could create a circumstance where those assets are now needed for use. You may need them for something now that that person is gone. And if you can't get to them, if you can't use them, that's going to create a big drag and a big shortfall that you're going to have to make up for. So here is actually the California probate fee schedule. I thought this would be fun to look at. So I was just reading this out of curiosity when I was kind of building these slides, and I was thinking, what actually is the fee for these sometimes? And I just wanted to go look at that. So I put this here, and basically for the services that the attorney for the personal representative, they will receive compensation based on the value of the estate accounted for, blah, blah, blah. 4% on the first $100,000. That's already a lot. 3% on the next 100,000, 2% on the next 8, 1% on the next 9 million, half of 1% on the next $15 million, and for all amounts above $25 million, yeah, a reasonable fee that they'll figure out at the time. So I'm sure they'll make sure that it's nice and affordable for that person. But it's just, those are some pretty big percentages. I mean, if you even compare that to expensive investment advisory fees, like even somebody who was charging you 2% or 2.5%, it's not 4 like they're charging here on the probate court. So it's just, those are big dollar amounts. And if instead we can take some of that money that would be spent on this estate and spend it on estate planning documents and spend it on time planning with people, we can get those costs out of the way. We can make sure everything's going to go where it is and let the rest of the money grow and support our goals.
Makes it longer, so the court has to determine if there's liens on a property, right? Is there loans, liens, settle everything. By the time they get money away, they don't want any blow-ups in their face. Whereas if it's a trust owns it, and then the beneficiary may or may not become a new trustee, but they more.
And
Yeah.
why would somebody ever want? I mean, is it by accident?
I would say usually by accident, or somehow you have a trust and you didn't put the property in the name of the trust. Right, we call that funding. And so if you have a large estate, several beneficiaries, properties, all those things, obviously you need an attorney and a trust ahead of time. But some people or older people just don't trust attorneys. How could that be? Right? Or whatnot, variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Who gets all that money? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's for the probate courts and for the representatives that they hire. So they'll choose somebody to be the representative or sort of like the executor in a way, and they'll collect those fees.
Right?
Yeah.
Valuations on assets and all that stuff.
Yeah, and so this is, I guess, this was sort of reminding that it's the gross for the purposes of the section, the amount that's accounted for, so this amount that's charged upon is the total amount of the appraisal of property in the inventory plus gains on the sales plus receipts, less losses, whatever, but without reference to encumbrances or other obligations to any loans. Loans or whatever, they don't care about debt. They want to charge it before the debt is paid. So that's not super fun. And even if you don't have a giant estate, just making sure that if you've got a simple thing, you've got a couple of retirement accounts and a home maybe, just making sure that there are beneficiary designations or a simple revocable living trust that can take care of it for you rather than just going, we'll let him figure it out when I'm gone. Because that's a lot of money. Yes.
They didn't put it in the trust, they just, I'm up to my house, they didn't put it in the trust, so my appointment is in October with my trust attorney to get that included.
Okay, great.
Is it possible that do I need to sign this affidavit that stops the probate in the interim? Like in the interim, I'm vulnerable.
So that affidavit is signed after death. So it's a post-death thing that like the executor or the trustee, whoever is managing your affairs. Yes.
This beneficiary, but
Yeah.
sign that just in basic.
Yeah, so she's going to be, if she's gonna be in charge and whatever the total amount is falls within there, she can't sign that affidavit and it will then bypass probate. Yes.
Change trust.
Well, I just make an appointment, I have an appointment in October to get the trust
Oh.
updated.
But you have a trust now,
Yeah,
and you're not gonna change the name of it.
no, right.
Then I check with the attorney, but I don't know why you couldn't go to the recorder's office, change the name of the property to that name of that trust. And then if you wanna do updates or restate later, you can.
So I can just go to the courthouse and get it done right now.
County recorder, yeah.
I do that too.
Yeah.
I went to the house and I had to change, you know.
Yeah, as soon as
Just
possible.
go to the court and just have to change.
Yeah.
That's
If you wanna send your attorney money, send money.
Well, there's a lot of other things I've done.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you're gonna
it's
fix
the
it.
one place I'm over.
Yeah, you'll probably do a restatement though, you won't get a whole new trust.
Okay,
A restatement lets you keep the old name. They may charge you $5,000, but we wanna keep that name if you've got it on assets. So a restatement is what you probably.
Yeah, it's really important that, well, actually what he's talking about, that then the similarity of the names is just because it's the same thing. It's very important that wherever it's recorded, the title of the trust is exactly the same. If you've got it written a certain way, if something is abbreviated, whatever it is, write it the same everywhere.
Yeah.
The same on beneficiary designations, if your IRA is going to go to a trust, if a life insurance proceeds are going to go to a trust. So if you're kind of routing everything to the trust, make sure that name is the same everywhere and that it's easy for people to recognize. Because I've heard of instances where like was missing or it was spelled wrong and they didn't want to transfer the assets because they couldn't be sure it was the same trust.
Yes, see the attorney about a restate, and you can change all the things you want, but keep the name like Nash is saying, and not mess everything else up. And you can go into the recorder's office Monday morning and get the title changed, because you're not gonna change it, right? And then you can still pay the attorney.
okay.
Yep.
Question over here.
Yes. So, anything?
No, okay.
Okay, good. All right. So there's a couple of different estate planning examples that we could have. Obviously, we know that the main one is to get our stuff to our people, but we have essentially inheritance, which is that. The main ways that you can get your money to your people. You have asset protection. So if you want to make sure that you can protect a group of assets or a big pile of things that are supposed to go somewhere, in the meantime, while you're alive, how do we make sure that they're protected so that when you pass, they're still there to go to the beneficiaries? And then, of course, charitable giving. If you are charitably minded, or if you're one of the kind of people that wants to give away their wealth when they pass, there are a multitude of options to be able to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about that first. You can put charities as beneficiaries on whatever accounts you want. So if you think maybe if you don't have a beneficiary you want to leave money to, somebody's already well off and you want to feel really good about what you've done, if you have money left over, you could put a beneficiary on your IRA to whatever charity you like the most, and it could just go right over there. Same thing for transfer on death accounts. So things like an individual brokerage account or checking account with a transfer on death provision, which is essentially like an add-on beneficiary. You could have it go straight to your charity. Qualified charitable distributions. This is a really useful one if you've got retirement accounts and you don't really need the income and you really hate taxes. It's always interesting to me when I work with people who want to do things like this because they hate paying the taxes so much more than they like having the extra money. And it's an interesting mindset thing that I've noticed. But if that is you, if you are very comfortable with your income from your Social Security, pension, whatever, and you're like, I don't need anything else, just keep that up there, keep it safe and invested, and I'm going to work with what I got. You can do what's called a qualified charitable distribution, which is where your required minimum distribution from your IRA, 401k, whatever retirement account, can go straight to a charity, and it's like it never even existed at all. No taxes, it just gets sent straight off to whatever charitable organization you want, and it doesn't change your income at all. So that can be very useful. And you can do them to a lot of different charities, and I believe there's actually, and I forget what the organization is here, but there's a charitable organization here that you can do some of your qualified charitable distributions to. So if you've got RMDs you don't need and you want to support the college or Renaissance or whatever it is, then you can move those distributions over there, and that's pretty great.
Very glad you do your trust for it.
Ooh.
That's who's the beneficiary.
I did not know that. That's cool. Um, the next thing is called a donor advised fund. This is something that I did with a client a little while ago, and I find these to be super helpful, super great. So essentially what the idea is your same scenario where you have money and you want to give it to a charity, but you're not sure which one yet. But you tax break like right now this year, but you still don't know where it's going to go. There are these things called donor advised funds where you move your money from your brokerage account or your bank account into the donor advised fund. And because you have relinquished control, you get the current tax write-off for the full amount. And then it sits in this donor advised fund managed by Schwab or some other advisor or something like that. And they hold on to it until you finally go, right, I know where I want it to go now. And then they will distribute it to the charity of your choice. And there's also some beneficiary, some contingent planning that they can handle it if you pass in the meantime. But if you're in a situation where you have appreciated stocks, a lot of extra cash, or you just feel like being charitable, but you don't really know who you want to be charitable to yet, but you would really like the tax deduction, a donor advised fund lets you front load that deduction today and then choose where it goes later. So super powerful. Yes.
Change your mind, want it back.
Sorry, you're not getting it back. I don't think so. I don't know, because yeah, it's basically if you already gave it to the charity. Yeah, it's already out of there.
The deduction, tax deduction. You can either take it all at once, but if it's too much, you can carry it forward, right?
Yes, yeah, so it'll depend on whether you're doing cash or whether you're doing securities, but there are limits to how much of your income for the year can be contributed. Yes. Yes, but you can carry it forward. Yeah. Okay.
Asked to look at. It's a tax, but it's
Yes.
a tax deferral, but you
Yeah.
haven't get money back. She said.
Right.
Change my mind.
Right. So the situation that I was working with, the situation I was working with my client where this was useful, where she was having, she was having some extra taxable stuff going on in her income, properties, sales, all these different types of things, and she could use a little bit of a deduction. But she also happened to be sitting on some NVIDIA stock that had just absolutely rocketed in value. And, she wasn't really looking to sell it and then pay the taxes on it. But she was thinking, oh, I could get this tax deduction by giving the donor advised fund my appreciated NVIDIA shares. So I don't have to pay the taxes on all of that gain. And she got the full deduction for the full value of those stocks. So the full $20,000, she got to write that off on her taxes. And then she also didn't have to deal with the ridiculous gain position. Because some people don't like paying taxes, even if it means they made a bunch of money. Taxes are like everybody's least favorite thing all the time. Be like, no, I don't want to sell the stock. So, but you will have more money, but it's taxes. And so, people just really hate taxes. So there's a couple things you can do there for your estate planning. So you can do donor advised funds. You can do those over the lifetime to where you stack up those exemptions or the deductions rather, and then you can have it be managed after your passing, or you give it to the charities during your lifetime. Now, when it comes to inheritance, obviously, things like a beneficiary designation, super important. I'll always say it every time I see the word. Make sure your accounts have beneficiary designations. If they don't have one, where do they go? Probate. So make sure they have beneficiary designations. Transfer on death, like I said, that's basically just an add-on beneficiary designation. You can stick on to like individual accounts, or you can even place it on personal residences and stuff like that. So that's another way that you can add that. And when you have a beneficiary or a transfer on death designation, assets are passing via what's called contract law, which basically says there's already a signed contract of where this is needing to go. So probate courts, you can't touch this. This has a destination already. So we want our assets to either be within contract law with those beneficiary designations, within our trusts, or otherwise handled. Now you've got something like a family limited partnership. This is kind of a niche concept, but for those that might have family businesses, something that you may do is create a family limited partnership where you own all of the general shares, the controlling shares, and then you have the rest, maybe 90% or 99% in limited partnership shares, where the people who own the shares don't have any control, they can't make decisions, but you're thinking, oh boy, all right, this business, and at some point, I'm going to have to offload this asset, this business asset to my beneficiaries. So if you create those limited partnership shares, you can gift little bits of those over your lifetime and still maintain control by holding the general shares. Anyway, that's kind of a niche thing, but revocable living trust, like we talked about, it's not protecting you from liabilities, but what it does do is anything you register into the name of the trust, it will follow whatever instructions the trust has. So the trust will have its set of instructions that says, with the assets in here, we're going to do this, this, and this thing. And then you just go, okay, this asset, I want it to be owned by the trust. This asset, I want to be owned by the trust. So that way it passes via those directions. Now remember, a revocable living trust, it's still your assets because you can take them in and out at any time. So it doesn't separate you from control of those. They're still yours. They're just organized for your beneficiaries. Wills, obviously it's important to have those, and they help kind of catch that personal property like we were talking about before. And then special needs trust is a very useful tool where if you have a special needs or some sort of beneficiary that receives government benefits, you want to leave them assets, but you don't want to mess up their benefits. A special needs trust can be put in place to pay only for day-to-day expenses and necessary things so that it doesn't disqualify them from receiving whatever aid that they receive. Now, in terms of asset protection, for the youngsters out there, those prenuptial agreements to make sure that you are protecting your assets. It's not about a lack of trust. It's about planning for those circumstances that we can't see coming. Things will change. Irrevocable trust. If assets are in an irrevocable trust, they're not yours, and they have to be not yours. You have to not be able to control them, or else they don't count as part of the irrevocable trust. Yes. So the trust will be now a separate entity. It will have its own tax number. So like a revocable trust operates under your social security number. Our irrevocable trust gets a federal tax ID number, kind of like a corporation. And so it exists as a separate entity, and then you will assign a trustee. That person is the person who's responsible for the assets, or that company be responsible. So you can be can you be the trustee if you're not receiving any benefits? No. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Is that if you were losing your mental capabilities or you did something, you don't want to lose that principle. We don't want to have to lie. And you take it out of your estate, you're just the income beneficiary or someday the income beneficiary. So if you said, look, I'm developing dementia or something. I want somebody to pay my income, pay my care, but I don't think I want to manage this stuff. You could create an irrevocable trust, hire a trustee who's required to follow your best interest, give you all the money you need for your care and all that type of thing. And then somebody, if they sue you, they can take this, they can sue.
You can't
Yeah.
change it. Once
Yeah.
you're revocable, you can't change it.
Yeah, and when you have those irrevocable trusts, what you do is essentially permanent. Like you're not taking stuff back, you're not taking assets back out, you're not changing all sorts of things. Yeah, you can't change your mind with an irrevocable trust as well. So,
Do a new one as an irrevocable.
yes, sure.
And there's financial protection.
Yeah, so an irrevocable trust, it'll be basically because it's not your money anymore. So if you do something, if there's a settlement against you, that's not yours. So it's not part of the pool from which they can draw from. It's the trusts.
The separate entity.
Yes, the separate entity. Yep.
You can set up an irrevocable trust for the church or a charity, but you want, there's more advancement. Talk about, you can take the income and it's for your benefit, but once you die, then that trust keeps it, then it goes to another entity or people.
Yeah.
To the benefit, your beneficiary.
Your beneficiaries, yeah, it's just kind of like, what if I do die, but I'm not sure, I want to lock this thing up, I don't want any changes.
Yeah, both, one revocable and none, another.
Sure, you can have multiple trusts. Yeah, no problem. You just have,
Same assets can't be in both.
no, the assets have to be owned by one.
Can I mention my trust?
Sure.
Okay, I have a living trust and then I have different LLCs and things like that. My main living trust says, look, I can change my mind and do whatever I want. My house is in it and rentals are not and other assets. But if I die, then it goes to the Nashoba Bailey Trust that's irrevocable. It turns into an irrevocable trust. And that's for his benefit because, and his protection, because if he gets in a car wreck or they go after all his assets, we don't want him owning the assets I spent a lifetime accumulating. So he's the beneficiary and he might be the trust protector. He can't manage the money. He can't be the trustee because that's a conflict of interest. The court would say, well, you have control of it, so we're gonna take all these assets. So my trust is revocable, but once I die, it converts to an irrevocable trust in his name. And then he's the beneficiary, but he's not the trustee. Because if he got a divorce or a lawsuit or something, I don't want my assets going somewhere else.
So who's the trustee of that?
I have a private company that's owned by the company that we work through in Nevada. I think it's Prime Trust.
Premier Trust, yeah.
Premier Trust, yeah, they're the.
The Nash can't be in charge of it, so he can't have any control over it.
He can't tell them, he can't get the money and control it because that would be a lack of arm's length. It's kind of like a president has put stuff in a blind trust, right? So, yeah,
Sorry.
so it's there for, yeah. Yeah, after so many years of age, then I may plug in that he could become the trustee, but if he does, then it's vulnerable because if he has control of it, it's no longer protected.
But how does, with the trustee, how does the trustee make decisions about that money since?
Yeah.
It's not their money, but
Right.
it's.
That's the whole benefit of the trust is you've already written out all the instructions.
Oh, for the
Yeah.
trustee and the
Yeah.
trustee has to
Yeah.
follow the
Yeah,
instructions.
he can be the trust protector to make sure nobody's taking advantage of it, and then he could fire this trustee and hire that one. And then maybe he could manage some money as a manager, get paid to manage, but he's not the trustee. That's the whole point, if you wanna protect somebody. So surgeons and people that have future liability do this type of thing, because they'd rather just put it in a lockbox. And then take money out, if he wants to use my rentals, my, office buildings, my retirement plan has to take money out over 10 years, pay taxes, and then lock it up again. And he may or may not need or have access to that. The main thing is keep it in the family. Hopefully, he's not gonna need it, but it's there. There isn't a need. So if you have a need to protect the assets, you can set up an irrevocable trust, or your revocable trust could say, if I die, because the revocable turns into an irrevocable once they die, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it has to be closed out, distributed, and you do everything.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yep. And then obviously, a couple things that we already talked about, homestead exemption and limited liability corporations, but we're a little bit past time. Next time, we'll have some more stuff in here to get to from a tax planning perspective. So we'll talk about taxes a little bit next time before we get into our next topic. But if you got any, oh, yes. Yeah.
Homestead exemption. Is that automatic or is there some paperwork you have to fill out?
I believe you actually have to fill out some paperwork. Yeah.
So even if our this is bad, you can go file it after the event, which you obviously could do with insurance. And,
Yeah.
You're an expert on homestead. Is it a full 600,000 or?
It depends on the median,
Yeah.
household price and that.
Okay.
So I think it makes sense, so it caps out at 600,000, but it could be as low as 400, 300.
Yeah, I think 320. That sounds familiar to me. Yeah.
The paperwork you file from downers.
Yeah, pretty much. And this, by the way, this is equity. This is not total home value. This is equity. So if you've got a mortgage on there, that actually helps a little bit because it's your equity that's protected, because obviously.
Your equity. Now you're saying you have to homestead it?
No, your equity is what's protected by the homestead.
But you do have to fill out some forms.
Yeah.
Homestead.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You
Yes.
can do it. Normally, you would be able to do that. So if an event happens, you go, oh my gosh, this is gonna be bad, I don't have enough insurance. You just go down, a homestead on your equity of the house, and you can get up to 600,000 depending on your neighborhood. So when I see, when Nash sees somebody that has a $500,000 house and a $500,000 neighborhood, and they've got beneficiaries on everything, and they don't want to do a trust and an umbrella, we could get away with it. You don't really need an umbrella for that person, but most of you would.
Okay, last thing I want to mention before we're done is we will be at the Senior Health and Resource Fair tomorrow at Wyndham Sacramento Hotel on Day Avenue. So if any of you are thinking about going, then you come. There's free admission, free parking, bunch of vendors are going to be there. I think there's an Elvis impersonator and some classic cars. So I don't know, it sounds like a fun time to me, but we'll be there all day, so you can come by and stop by. Yes, of course, you can always email with any questions. Yeah, it should be on some of the documents, but thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week.